What happens when a simple rejection turns into a life-altering tragedy? How far can obsession go before it becomes something much darker? And when the system fails to act, who is left to fight for justice? This is the story of Neha Deshmukh, a school teacher whose life was forever changed by a brutal acid attack carried out in broad daylight by a man she had once rejected. But what pushed Raghav Kulkarni, a man with a troubling history of obsession, to cross the line from stalking to violence? Was this just an isolated act, or was Neha's attack the result of a system that allowed warning signs to go unnoticed? How many women have silently endured harassment, knowing the consequences could escalate at any moment? Why did it take so long for the police to recognize the danger, even after Neha's repeated reports? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Neha's story is not just about survival, it's a fight for justice that led to a larger movement for change. Her journey sparked legal reforms, but at what cost? How much does it take to change a broken system? This is a story that asks tough questions and demands answers. Would you be able to stand up after your world has been shattered? Neha did. The real question is, will the world ever truly change? Welcome to the Crime Series. I am glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you are watching from. In the town of Nashik, Maharashtra, Neha Deshmukh, a school teacher, lived a quiet life, one that seemed far removed from the violence that would soon invade it. Raised alongside her brother Nahu Deshmukh in a modest household, Neha's childhood was shaped by the values instilled by her parents. Her father, Arvind Deshmukh, a former teacher turned small business owner, emphasized the importance of education, while her mother, Kavita Deshmukh, a skilled nurse, taught Neha and her brother compassion and care for others. Neha's younger brother looked up to her for everything and also followed in the footsteps of their parents. Their two-bedroom home was a place of stability, where Neha and her brother felt safe and loved. From a young age, Neha excelled in her studies. She was a bright, determined student focused on her future. Her ambition was not driven by the desire for fame or attention, but by a genuine desire to make a difference through education. Upon completing her schooling, Neha followed in her father's footsteps and became a teacher, dedicating herself to shaping young minds. Her life was simple and predictable, defined by the routine of teaching, coming home to her family, and spending quiet evenings in solitude. Neha's life, however, was about to be disrupted in a way she never expected. It started with the persistent advances of a man in community, Raghav Kulkarni. He was in his early 30s. Raghav had lived his entire life in Nashik, a town he knew well but had never quite felt at home in. He came from a middle-class family, his father, Arvind Kulkarni, a local barber, and his mother, Kavita Kulkarni, a fashion designer. While his family was respected in the community, Raghav had always felt like an outsider. Though polite and well-mannered, he struggled to connect with others, particularly women. His attempts at relationships often ended in rejection, and rather than accepting these failures, Raghav's obsession with those who rejected him grew stronger. Then he met Neha. At first, his gestures were subtle: compliments, casual greetings, and offers to start a relationship. Neha, focused on her teaching career and personal life, politely declined, but his advances didn't stop. He grew more persistent, crossing boundaries she wasn't prepared for. Neha rejected him firmly, hoping that would end it, but it didn't. What she had initially seen as harmless attention quickly turned into something much more unsettling. His behavior became a pattern of stalking. He began showing up at places Neha frequented, uninvited and unwanted, following her to work, lingering near the school where she taught, and sending her increasingly frequent messages. Neha tried to distance herself, but his presence remained constant. What had started as a simple rejection had spiraled into something far more dangerous. Her firm, clear boundaries, the directness of her refusal, became a challenge in his mind. He couldn't understand why she, like the others, wouldn't accept him. To him, Neha's resistance wasn't just a no, it was something he had to break through. She wasn't the first woman to turn him down. There had been others before her, but something about her rejection stung more than the rest. In the past, when women rejected him, he would attempt to move on, only to harbor a growing frustration. With Neha, however, his fixation deepened. As weeks turned into months, the man's obsession grew, and Neha became more and more uncomfortable. She took measures to avoid him, altering her routine, changing her schedule, and keeping her distance whenever possible. But despite these precautions, he refused to leave her alone. His obsession was no longer about pursuing a relationship, it was about control. He wanted Neha, and in his mind, rejection was not an option. Realizing the severity of the situation, Neha reported his stalking to the police, hoping for help. But at the time, laws surrounding stalking were insufficient and poorly enforced. Authorities did not take the case seriously, and no protection was put in place. Neha, left to fend for herself, continued to live in fear as the man's obsession deepened. This man, consumed by rejection and entitlement, crossed a line in his mind. Neha had rejected him, and in his twisted logic, that meant she was still his. He just had to make her realize it. What began as innocent advances had escalated into a dangerous obsession, and Neha was now his prey. The stalking had turned into something far darker, and the horrific attack that would change Neha's life forever was now imminent. On a seemingly ordinary afternoon in Nashik, Neha Deshmukh was walking home after another day at work. Neha's path was a familiar one, a quiet stretch of road she had walked countless times before. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but that afternoon, something changed. As Neha walked along the road, she noticed a figure ahead, Raghav Kulkarni, the man who had been stalking her for months. His presence was immediate and unsettling. He was waiting for her, his eyes fixed on her as she approached. Neha, sensing something was wrong, felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had seen him before, but this time the encounter felt different. Before she could react, he stepped forward. Without warning, Raghav threw acid at Neha. The liquid hit her face and upper body, instantly causing severe burns. Neha screamed in agony as the acid ate through her skin. The pain was unbearable, and within seconds she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Witnesses nearby froze, some rushing to her aid, while others stood in shock, unsure of how to respond. What had begun as an ordinary walk home quickly turned into a life-altering moment. Neha's life was forever changed in an instant, and the shockwave of this public attack reverberated through the town. The violence was over in seconds, but its effects would last far longer. Neha was quickly transported to the hospital, her body covered in deep, painful burns. If you found this story compelling and appreciate the way we bring real-life cases to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue to uncover the truth and share these important stories. Like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. The severity of her injuries was evident, but the emotional and psychological trauma she would face in the coming months would prove to be just as devastating. As emergency services arrived, the man who attacked Neha disappeared into the crowd, leaving chaos in his wake. Neha's life, once simple and routine, was now forever marked by violence. What had been a rejected advance had now spiraled into an act of brutality that would redefine her future. The brutal acid attack on Neha Deshmukh sent shockwaves through Nashik. In broad daylight, she had been targeted by a man she had rejected months earlier. Her injuries were severe, with deep burns covering her face and torso, leaving her fighting for her life in the hospital. The town was in shock. Witnesses who saw the attack unfold were left paralyzed, unable to process the violence that had occurred in plain sight. For Neha's family, the horror was unbearable. Her parents and younger brother struggled to understand how their loved one could become the victim of such a brutal assault. The news reached them in the most unimaginable way. Neha's younger brother, who had been on his way to meet her after school, received a frantic call from a neighbor who had witnessed the attack. His voice trembling, he rushed to inform Neha's parents. Her father, Arvind, a quiet man of few words, was struck speechless, while her mother, Kavita, rushed to the hospital, her mind unable to grasp the full extent of the tragedy. The emotional toll on them was profound as they kept vigil at Neha's bedside, hoping for recovery. Neha's attack quickly became national news, sparking outrage. The incident highlighted a growing problem: the lack of adequate protection for women in public spaces. It wasn't just about Neha anymore. The conversation shifted from Neha's individual tragedy to the systemic problems that allowed this violence to continue, and also about the many women who suffered in silence from harassment and violence, often without consequences. For Neha, the physical recovery would be difficult, but the long-lasting trauma, fear, pain, and the loss of her sense of security would prove even harder to heal. The road ahead would be long, and Neha's fight for recovery was only just beginning. As Neha Deshmukh fought for her life in the hospital, the investigation into the acid attack gained momentum. The police quickly identified the attacker as the man who had been stalking Neha for months, coupled with that fact that Neha had once filed a report of being stalked by someone who was later identified as her attacker. His obsession with her had turned violent, culminating in the brutal assault. As the search for the attacker continued, Neha's family, the police, and the community waited for justice. Anger and fear filled the air as people demanded accountability. The question now was whether the police would catch the perpetrator and bring him to justice, or if the system would once again fail to protect the most vulnerable. Witnesses had seen the man who attacked Neha in broad daylight, and descriptions of him matched Raghav. He had been following her for weeks, and his behavior had escalated over time. The police quickly pieced together that Raghav's fixation on Neha had driven him to violence. His motives were no longer hidden. They were clear. The search for him intensified. Neha's family, the police, and the community waited for justice. As the manhunt continued, the public's outrage grew. This was not just a case of one man attacking a woman. It was a reminder of the broader issue of harassment and violence against women that remained unchecked. Would Raghav be caught and held accountable for his actions? Neha and her family hoped for justice, but the real question was whether the legal system would act swiftly enough to prevent further tragedies like this from happening. Raghav's face was soon plastered on wanted posters and circulated across news outlets. The manhunt intensified, with authorities urging the public to help locate him. Eventually, a tip-off led the police to a small apartment on the outskirts of Nashik, where Raghav was found hiding. He was arrested without resistance, his earlier attempts to flee now rendered futile. Raghav's cold demeanor during the arrest further confirmed the police's suspicions. He showed no remorse and refused to discuss the crime. With his capture, Neha's family, while still grieving, felt a sense of relief that the man who had caused so much pain was finally in custody. However, the real fight for justice was just beginning. The trial would determine if Raghav would truly be held accountable for his actions, and whether Neha could finally find some measure of peace. With Raghav Kulkarni in custody, the case against him moved into the courtroom. For Neha Deshmukh's family, the trial marked the next step in their pursuit of justice. But as the legal process began, it became clear that Raghav's history of obsessive behavior extended beyond his fixation on Neha. It had been a troubling pattern that had gone unnoticed until now. Before Neha entered his life, Raghav had displayed signs of unhealthy obsession. Friends and colleagues described him as someone who struggled with rejection and had a history of fixating on women who weren't interested in him. There were previous reports of him stalking women, becoming increasingly possessive and controlling after they turned him down. These earlier instances were dismissed as mere infatuation, and Raghav faced no real consequences. But with Neha, his behavior took a more dangerous turn. During the process of the trial, the courtroom was filled with a tense atmosphere. Neha's family, still grappling with the aftermath of the brutal attack, sat through each session, hoping for justice. The prosecution laid out the details of the case. Raghav had been stalking Neha for months before he attacked her, but the real focus was on the premeditated nature of his crime. The evidence was undeniable. Witnesses, security footage, and Neha's previous reports to the police, which now confirmed Raghav's obsessive behavior. Raghav's defense team tried to argue that the attack was a spur-of-the-moment decision, driven by emotional distress. But the prosecution countered by emphasizing his history of obsessive actions and his calculated planning of the assault. His repeated rejection of Neha, followed by the escalation to violence, was not a random act. Key evidence presented during the trial included security footage showing Raghav in the vicinity of the attack on the day it occurred, placing him at the scene. Eyewitnesses confirmed his presence, and forensic evidence linked him to the acid used in the attack. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, leaving little room for doubt. As the trial progressed, the public's interest grew. Neha's case, once a personal tragedy, became a symbol of a much larger issue: harassment, stalking, and violence against women. Advocacy groups rallied behind Neha, demanding stricter laws to protect women and prevent similar crimes from happening in the future. In the end, the jury delivered its verdict. Raghav Kulkarni was found guilty of attempted murder, stalking, and harassment. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, sending a powerful message that such crimes would not be tolerated. While Neha's family was relieved by the conviction, they knew the road to healing was far from over. The physical scars Neha bore were just the beginning. The emotional and psychological toll of the attack would take time to recover from. But the conviction of her attacker marked a turning point, not just for Neha, but for the larger fight against gender-based violence and obsession. The trial and verdict were a small victory in the ongoing battle for women's safety, but Neha's story served as a powerful reminder of the need for systemic change. The legal system had finally delivered justice in her case, but the larger work of protecting women from harassment and violence was just beginning. With Raghav Kulkarni sentenced to life in prison, Neha Deshmukh's case became a turning point, sparking widespread attention and calls for legal reform. The case had exposed critical gaps in the legal system and highlighted the need for stronger protections against stalking and gender-based violence. In the wake of the trial, Neha and her family became vocal advocates for reform. They worked alongside organizations to raise awareness about stalking, harassment, and acid attacks, sharing Neha's story to inspire others to speak out. While Neha's physical recovery continued, it was clear that the emotional scars from the attack would take longer to heal. The media coverage of the case prompted a broader societal shift. Discussions about the need for preventive measures, including better enforcement of stalking laws, grew louder. Neha's experience revealed just how much more needed to be done to protect women from escalating violence. Though Neha's journey to healing was long and challenging, her determination to fight for justice helped spark a movement that transcended her case. Her courage to speak out inspired countless others to demand change, ensuring that her legacy would be one of progress, advocacy, and hope for women facing similar threats. If this story moved you, disturbed you, or opened your eyes, subscribe to our channel for more real-life crime documentaries and fictional stories inspired by true events. We uncover the darkest corners of human nature, so you can be more aware, more informed, and maybe even safer. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something just isn't right.